Hey everyone, CPO here, and in this video, I'm going to be replacing my thermostat housing and the thermostat. Obviously, it comes as a unit. The reason I'm doing that is because I have a leak, and I've had a leak for maybe 2 years. I know, it's crazy. I haven't changed it. I haven't really been forced to change it. It's a super minor leak. I'll show you what I'm seeing that tells me that I have a problem with my thermostat housing. It's a plastic housing, so it's not uncommon for it to crack or leak. But the leak has been so slow, I've just sort of left it alone. And I'm getting ready to take the Moab trip coming up here in a few weeks. So I figure it's probably better to change it now before I'm forced to change it on the highway. Don't worry, I'm certified YouTube mechanic and I have proof because I'm wearing my flip-flops. All right, so shooting up underneath, that is the thermostat housing there. It's plastic and it just sticks off the front of the engine and then connects to the upper radiator hose there. And you see all that pink stuff on the bottom of that hose? That is coolant residue. So I've got just enough of a leak that some coolant is coming out and sort of seeping down to the bottom of that hose, but it's not enough to really like lose fluid, you know, in a large enough capacity to be a big deal. But it is time to change it out. I do have a leak. And so the first time I noticed that I had a leak was when I changed out my front axle. When I swapped the factory Dana 30 for this Pro Rock 44, I found on top of the pumpkin here some of that residue. And I probably have some on this too, but I'm not gonna jump up there to try and find it, because I already know I have a leak. But you can smell, sometimes when the engine's hot, I can smell a little bit of that coolant smell. Anytime you smell that sweet coolant smell, you've got a leak somewhere. For the longest time, I also had a leak in my coolant overflow bottle, which I eventually replaced. So this is the only thing I have left that's a leak. I did have my radiator replaced at one time because it leaked. But anyway, this guy's gonna go, and I'm gonna do it without draining the radiator. If it goes the way I think it's gonna go, it should be a pretty quick job. So basically what we're gonna do is remove this intake, and then we're gonna get down there, and I'll try and give you as good of a view as I can. Remove that. This is the upper radiator hose that connects to the thermostat housing. We're gonna disconnect that from the housing. 2 bolts, 10mm bolts, one up and one lower. We're gonna pull that thing off, replace it, and put the hose back on, and then we'll use the bleeder screw on the top to bleed the air out of the system. And yeah, should be that easy, right? Let's hope. All right, so I am gonna have a little coolant spillage just from disconnecting that hose and then pulling off the thermostat. So I just want to look and see, make sure I've got enough coverage. It's going to drip down. I'm going to use this tub to catch as much of that as I can. And yeah, so let me start pulling this off. By the way, I've been letting this thing cool down since I drove it home, so you don't want to do this on a hot vehicle. Let that stuff cool. All right. Loosen it. 10mm for these guys. And then another flathead screwdriver here. And normally you could just set this assembly out of the way. I'm going to disconnect this air temperature sensor wire just so that I can get you a good camera shot. All right, so now with that air intake out of the way, we've got access to get to that thermostat housing. Now I don't have hose clamp pliers. If you do, they're probably easier than these pliers. All right. Now you can see The hose pretty easily wants to come off, and I'm going to lose some fluid, but I've got my bucket down there. And then what I want to do is just get this up higher than the top of the radiator. I'm just going to let that continue to drain out into that bucket. I have the bucket down there below, basically right underneath the pumpkin, the differential. As a matter of fact, I'll show you where it's at. All right, so now I'm going to use 10 millimeter. Come in here and these are not torqued down very much at all, so it shouldn't take hardly anything to get them out of there. Matter of fact, I can't even see that one. I'm just going to feel for it. And then now this thing is just going to pop right off. Now there is a gasket that is left behind. You want to make sure you get that out of there. It's basically a little rubber gasket. And then you just want to make sure that you clean off the outside of that. I've got a little bit of like crud, just some dirt. So I'm just going to clean off around the outside edge of that. All right, so now hopefully you can see back in there where I've got that thermostat housing removed, all cleaned up, ready for the replacement. Let me show you the replacement. So first of all, this is what we took out, the old thermostat and the gasket. And you can see here, I'm not sure where I'm leaking, but I feel like it's somewhere in this area down here. Either way, we're about to fix that problem. All right, so here is the replacement I'm using, and I'll give you a good look there at the part number. And as you can see, it has that gasket already in place and ready to go, and comes with the thermostat itself, so it only can be purchased as an assembly, and that's the way you want to change it out. So we're just going to install this right where we took the other one out. All right, so let's get this thing installed. It's really as simple as just putting in these two bolts that we took out when we removed the old one. Now I did clean the threads off here. I debated using an antifreeze for this, but to be honest with you, the bolts that I removed weren't bad at all, so I just decided to put them back in the way they were after cleaning the threads. So I'm just hand tightening these, and the key here is that these do not require a lot of torque. Now I happen to have a 1/4 inch torque wrench that I use fairly infrequently with a 3/8 inch adapter, so I can use it with my 10 millimeter socket here. The torque on this is 106 inch-pounds, so a very light amount of torque. So you don't need to use a torque wrench. I highly recommend it, but just look at how little pressure I'm using to torque this thing down. So keep that in mind if you don't have a torque wrench. Now we're going to slip that hose back on, try not to spill whatever coolant is left in there, and then of course get that hose clamp pulled back into place. Alrighty. So now you can see here, this is the air bleed valve. And I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver just to loosen this up. So then what I'm going to do is go over and take off the cap for the radiator. And I have this spill-proof funnel that I bought just for this project. And it has a variety of different adapters and fittings for different vehicles and radiators and whatnot. So you just need to figure out which one fits yours. In my case, it's the red one. And then there's this little adapter that goes in there. Actually, let me take this apart and show you how that all goes together so you don't miss it. So this piece just is going to push down all the way into the radiator as far as it'll go, and then that cap is going to cinch down and tighten it all up. Once you've got that, then you can stick the funnel on top, All right, so for antifreeze, this is really important. You need to make sure you get the right antifreeze for your vehicle. There's HOT and there's OAT, and your user's manual will tell you which one you need. I need this kind. But I have a 2015 JK, and I don't want to tell you what I'm using because it's going to be different on yours. So check your user's manual, go to a dealership. I always use MOPAR stuff. That's debatable, but anyway. Then you can get this in two different kinds. You can get it pre-diluted, 50-50, which is what this is, or you get it in concentrate, which is what this is, concentrate, which means you have to dilute it yourself. Same ratio, 50-50, and you dilute it with distilled water. So it's a little bit cheaper if you do it this way, but this is tons more convenient. So when I go out on trips and I want to take coolant with me, like when I go to Moab, I'm going to take spare coolant, I'm going to take diluted 50-50 so that I don't have to worry about mixing with distilled water. But for operations like this at the house, I keep regular standard stuff just because it's a little bit cheaper in the long run. For now, I'm going to pour in what's left of this 50-50 into the cap. And what I want to do is pour antifreeze in through the top of the radiator, down and out, push all the air out of that air bleeder valve on the thermostat housing, and eventually we're going to start seeing antifreeze come out and not air, and that's when we'll tighten it down. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and put this air intake back in place so that I can start the engine up and still keep it protected, and then we'll finish flushing out and burping the system. Make sure you don't trap your overflow hose. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and rinse off all of that antifreeze off the engine. And it's really important that you get this stuff cleaned off of everything. It's pretty nasty stuff. And also make sure you rinse it really well. If you got any spills, or of course, you know, as we're rinsing it off the engine, this stuff is highly toxic to pets, and because of its sweet smell, they're drawn to it. So it is a pretty serious poison. So you really want to make sure that you get it well diluted. It's also important to make sure you dispose of whatever fluid that you've drained into that bucket or tub. Dispose of it properly. Don't leave it laying around for pets to get into. Bad. All right, so now we're ready to start the vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and put some more of this 50-50 mix. You can see the level right here. Just maybe an inch, inch and a half up into that funnel. And what's going to happen is when we start the engine, it's going to suck down whatever it needs, and it's going to burp and level out, and eventually we'll get to the point where we can take this off. All right, so when we start the engine, I'm going to turn the heater on full and leave the fan at its lowest level. And it doesn't really matter where you put that. I'm going to put it in the floor. And what that's going to do is allow the coolant to flow through the heater core and push any air out of there as well. See it bubbling? So we want to run this until it gets hot enough that the thermostat opens, starts circulating coolant through the engine and the heater core and all that stuff, and then it will push out whatever air. All that air is going to rise up, burp out of here, and this is sort of containing the entire thing. So this can take a little while because we need the engine to get nice and hot. And I can squeeze this and pop some air out of there. And I also want to look for leaks. Probably harder to do this with a camera, but basically I'm just looking around, seeing if there's anything linking. Obviously we know what we just replaced, so I'm looking in that area. Okay, I've been running this long enough that the thermostat just opened up, and I saw some bubbles pushing up, but I didn't catch it on video on time. Yeah, that's the goal. Let it run, let it heat up. Now I can feel this upper hose is hot, which means the thermostat has opened. And coolant is flowing now from the engine block into the radiator. Like I said, I'm just waiting for any other bubbles to pop up. 10, 15, 20 minutes, I don't know how long I've been out here. You can see the level of the coolant has raised a little bit from where it was. I think it raised a little bit and then dropped a little bit when the thermostat opened up. So raised a little bit because as the coolant heats, the thermal properties cause expansion, so it takes up more volume the hotter it is. But then it sucked it back down because it needed to replace whatever air popped out. Let's check vehicle info. Coolant temp 219. A few more air bubbles. Yep, so what you want to do is just sort of let this process run its course until you're not getting any more bubbles. Look at that. So I do have the vehicle parked at a slight incline, just because the way my driveway slopes up. That's actually the high point, which is what you'd want. You can see how the fluid seems to be sort of tilting. It's because, yeah, this is a high point of the driveway. I did that on purpose. I mean, it's also where I normally park, but I know that when I decided to start this process. Yep. Coolant temp's now down to 210, so we know for sure the thermostat opened up, which is when we saw all those bubbles. So yeah, perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. And I do have the hose just sort of running. My plan is to just hyper saturate and dilute anything that would have spilled, any drops or, you know, whatever. Just super saturate them with water so that it's pet safe. I want to be kind to my pets. Properly get rid of your antifreeze. I'm going to take mine to the dump. I think they'll take it. If not, probably an auto parts store. I don't know, I have to figure that out. So another tip to help dislodge bubbles is to come in here and give it a little bit of skinny pedal. What that might do, at least what people think it does, and I believe it to be true, is revving the engine sort of jars it around and frees up and loosens some bubbles. Let's go see if it makes a difference. Yeah, definitely have some more bubbles coming out after that. All right, once all the bubbles have stopped, I know it's cycled a couple of times of the thermostat and the fan. I'm going to put in the plug, and then what I'm going to do is pull this off without spilling it everywhere if I can. And then I'm going to set it in my 50-50 mix. And go ahead and drain it into that. Then I'll rinse this out. Now I can pull off this cap adapter. Put on my regular radiator cap. Quick rinse. And guys, that is it. That's really all that's involved in changing your thermostat. And you saw a couple different things here. How to bleed air out of the system, as well as obviously making the change. It's really not that difficult of a job, and the part was pretty inexpensive. I got it off Amazon. I'll also put a link to that down in the description. If you buy using my link, you do help support my channel. Just so you know, I do have an Amazon affiliate account set up. So yeah, that's that. I'm gonna go take it for a test drive, and what I'll do is after I take it for a test drive, I'll bring it back, let it cool down, and then I'll check the overflow tank levels and adjust that accordingly. But yeah, that's it guys. I hope you enjoyed. Hope it's helpful. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.